So the objective is of this video today is for us to go over your group profile. So we'll look at the tests that you administered, your scores, how they fell on a graph, and then appropriate grouping you should do for your kids regarding your reading groups and spelling groups. So if you have any questions or any ideas or anything throughout, you can feel free to ask.
Okay.
So the way this profile is set up is you actually have your school demographics first. So it describes West Elementary, its location, some of the programs we use, grade levels, makeup of students. All these graphs are from the Department of Ed, actually Department of Elementary and Secondary Education. So if you want further information from here, you can visit their website. But we have the enrollment of students in West as compared to the district, which is sometimes just interesting to know. We also have MCAS scores, which I know as a first grade teacher, Mrs. DuBois, you are not tested in MCAS. However, you can look at these grades and see previous students and their scores on MCAS as well. So that's sort of just the beginning of your profile. And here, listed on the list of information sources, is the tests that you administered. So you did the Fountas and Pinnell benchmark assessment, the DIBELS.
Nurse Kane, if you're in the building, could you please call the office? Nurse Kane, call the office.
And the Words Their Way spelling inventory.
Yes.
And so you administered all these tests to all the students in your classroom?
Yes, I did.
Okay. And so from here, the first thing that I decided to look at was your Fountas and Pinnell benchmark scores, because I think that that gives us a lot of information as teachers as to where to place our students in reading, their leveled books, when we make guided reading groups, and their books they choose to read throughout the day. Here is the graph of the Fountas and Pinnell reading levels. Now that's lettered. We know it goes A through Z. And first grade is actually an A, B to about an I, which is a big span. In graphing them, if there is a way, I don't know of it, but I don't know how to graph things by alphabet letters, so I transferred them to numbers. So you'll find the correlation chart here. So in looking at your graph, this first one is the benchmark scores of the kids in your class, just in alphabetical order.
Okay.
So actually I'd prefer to just move to your next one, which is in order of the lowest score to the highest score. So if we look down here, we see Adams at a 0, and I'll pull out the chart. And so a 0 is kind of less than A. And if we look back at your class composite sheet of the benchmark assessments, I saw pre-A.
Yes.
So that was sort of...
Yeah, because he scored below the 90%, and then he didn't have any fluency. He did have some comprehension, but it was below the accuracy rate. So.
Okay. And so he's someone who's at a 0, because he's kind of before
frustrated at the A level.
Yes. Is he someone that you work with letter sounds?
Yes.
Okay.
Yeah.
And actually, if we look at his spelling inventory, he was it looked like he was in the emergent letter sounds. Is that like initial consonants?
Yes.
Okay, so
Yep.
basically letter sounds.
Yes.
Has he moved to vowels yet?
We're working on vowels.
Okay.
We're doing short A now.
Oh,
so,
okay. Okay.
Yeah, with the Words Their Way, kids like that in that stage will move from A, like word families, and then we'll go to E, I, and we'll move through all the vowels singularly, and then we'll put them together. So.
Okay. Now, is it easy, I guess we'll switch to Words Their Way now, and then we'll come back to this. Is it easier for you to group him with other students that scored in this late emergent letter sounds, or is he someone who needs separate instruction?
I'm giving him with this small group instruction, but giving him more support as he is lower than the other kids. Giving him more support with the consonant sounds, where some of the other kids knew like beginning and final consonants. He had all beginning consonants, some final consonants, and I think very little vowel representation too. But for management reasons, keeping him in that group, but giving him extra support.
And I think that that's great. I had him in this group as well, not only to, assuming that he would need the extra support because he's so much lower than the rest of the kids, but the rest of these kids can at least serve as models, and he can kind of see what it looks like for kids to know their letters, know those short vowels combined with the consonants, so he's kind of hearing it and seeing it with them. So I think that that's a great idea.
And each group is kind of like that too. Even though you're grouping the class into groups of 3, you still have that the varying levels within that one group too.
And I found that with your benchmark scores, so sorry, we'll go back to that. So here were your lower kids, here's sort of your mid-readers, and then you had, it was interesting once graphing them to kind of see kids fall in a lot of the same places, and then you have one really strong reader up here.
I've never had something like this before. I've always had a small group of higher readers.
Okay.
But this group I have some pretty solid lower level groups, but also a pretty solid group of kids that are right at like a beginning first grade level.
Okay.
So she's the one that I'm struggling with and hope to have your guidance about
Okay.
how to help the
and
one.
These were kind of things that I was looking for because I know you're experienced in making your reading group. So I was sort of looking for where the confusion would come. I saw Adam as one with the letter sound, so that was my first concern. But looking here, we'll keep the graphs out. Looking here, here was what I suggested for your instructional levels, and I can kind of explain why. We can look at comprehension and fluency later. But these students are reading at an A or about an A. We know Adam is a pre-A, but it still may be beneficial for him to sit in a group with students reading an A. Again, kind of just to have the book skills. Even, I don't know how far his book skills are, of like page turning, print direction. So that's something that's beneficial for him to see. These students as models, he would need that extra support as well, though.
Within that small group too.
Now, one of the ones, if we look at your scores here, Jonathan and Riley actually have the same reading level as Audrey. I'm sorry.
Yep,
No,
Jonathan. And,
I'm sorry. John and Audrey have lower reading levels than Jonathan and Riley. But I grouped all four together because John and Audrey are the lower readers. They're reading at a level B. Riley and Jake are reading at a C, but their comprehension was so much lower than the rest of your C readers that I thought that it would be beneficial to group them in a B book just for now, for the time being, to practice comprehension strategies until they've kind of built up those strategies, and then they can use them in a text that is at their instructional level. That way, when they're reading the B book, they're struggling less to read it and working harder on their comprehension.
Okay.
So that was just a suggestion if you were looking to kind of make your groups even. And because otherwise, if you had a group all reading from C at the same time, it would just be so much larger. So that's why here in this graph, these students have stars next to their name, and then just down here it just says that they read an instructional C, but having them in a B group may just help improve their comprehension until they're ready to move into the C and use those comprehension strategies they've learned.
Okay.
And then you have a lot of C readers right here, and that was actually why I moved these two below. So that's Jonathan, Aaliyah, Christian, and Maxwell. And it was actually funny because when I was doing the grouping, I was looking at boys and girls, trying to make sure that I had both, and it just seemed to work out. You only have one group of all boys, but the rest of them seem to mix girl and boy, so then we don't have to really worry too much about trying to have a girl in a group with all boys or a boy in a group with all girls just because it's their instructional reading level. So we've kind of worked through that.
I've always had heavy boy classes, and I've never thought of the social kind of aspect of that, thinking that the leveled reading is always more important than the actual balancing of the gender.
Right. And so it actually worked out perfect this time, so we don't have to worry about that. But so the next concern that you had mentioned was Abigail, because she's such a high reader. The highest readers next from her are a level D, and she is reading at a level J. So she's really high up there. So I did actually group her in your level D groups because this gives you 4 reading groups. And what can happen is she may be reading at a J. I don't know her as a student, but of course you do as a classroom teacher. But she still may need the strategies that level D readers need, or the skills that they're learning at that time. So it would be beneficial for her to sit in a guided reading group with them, but then just to learn the strategies and the skills, but then be reading out of a separate text.
Okay.
So she will be someone who may need that specialized instruction that may be something really different than the rest of the group is doing just to meet her needs because she's such a high reader there. And then again, of course, this was one assessment, so you may come across something along the way that she does struggle with in that small group that you'll be able to say, oh, okay, here is where we go from here with that instruction.
That's a great idea. Because I was thinking of strategy groups, too, where we could pull a group with her reading at a J-level book, but also in a group that all needs the same strategy.
Yes.
Even if it's a D-level book or a C or things like that, too, because it was, when I saw the results, I knew it was going to be challenging to get her needs met too, where it wasn't just like a one-on-one with the teacher kind of experience for her.
And I think that that's great that you're thinking of leveled groups as well as skill groups, because then you're still mixing the groups. These groups are flexible, of course, as the kids' benchmarks change and their reading levels get higher, but then with your skill groups, you can kind of mix everyone together.
Yes.
So your high readers are good
Yep.
models for your lower readers, where everyone's reading in their own instructional text, so that's
But still
excellent as
practicing
well.
the same strategy kind
Exactly.
of skills, yeah.
A second recommendation that I made was fluency groups, and they are a little bit different from your leveled groups because your fluency scores are listed here. You had some students who really weren't fluent, so they were kind of sounding out letters.
Very choppy. Word by word by word.
Now,
very
is it
slow.
So that's actually good for me to hear. I was going to ask if it was like segmenting letters and blending, or if it was just word for word.
Just very choppy word
Okay.
for word.
Okay.
Yeah. Because at the A level, all these students that I gave a 0 fluency for, it's all repetitive. The text is all repetitive.
Okay.
And even with the repetitive text and like the one word changed at the end, it was still like word by word by word. Just
Okay.
very, very. And then using the picture clues to figure out that last word. But no sounding of any, no fluency sounding, no fluent reading or even close to fluent reading yet.
Okay.
But it's less of the sounding out because the words are really predictable
Which
at
is-
the A level.
Which is great. I mean, and
Yeah.
that's a good indicator that they're reading these words and they recognize them rather than sounding out each letter as they go. So that's excellent. So they were your lowest fluency students. So I had them in a group together. And then I had this group here, your third group, and your fourth group. Now, you had mentioned skill groups. These don't have to be fluency groups all year. This is one suggestion for a type of skill group you could do. So the skill they could be working on is fluency.
Okay.
If you notice, they are mixed a little bit. So we see Abigail is with Joshua, and is Adelaide?
Yes. Yep.
Adelaide. So Joshua and Adelaide have pretty high fluency, and they're with Abigail, so it might be beneficial for them to hear her with dialogue, or
Okay.
maybe they have less of that in the text that they're reading now, and maybe just hear her expression. And then Maxwell's a high reader, but his fluency is a little bit lower, so it looked like that he would group well with the rest of these
Oh,
students
that's
who were
great.
kind of...
Yeah, that's really great to look at.
And the groups are manageable sizes. I tried to keep them between 4 and 5 to really get a small group setting. I know sometimes when we're looking at scores of kids, if we try and group, these 7 kids together, we're losing that small group. So I really tried to stay on top of that as well. So now we're moving on to your Words Their Way spelling inventory. And we can pull out your composite sheet just to see, there we go, of your scores. And having them ordered highest to lowest, that was very helpful, thank you. And so looking here, the biggest thing that I sort of focused on was what are they actually working on in their spelling. So here are some recommended grouping strategies. Recommended groups before you start the strategies. So these students are all in late emergent letter sounds, so they could be a group. These students were early letter name, the alphabetic sounds, they could be a group. And then your middle letter name, alphabetic, they could be a group. But then down here, what you can actually do in these groups, and these can be larger since they're just actually the sorts. It's not actually so much of the small meeting rather than the practicing and finding the relationships. But down here, it gave you the actual letters or sounds to work on.
Okay.
So Christian,
So
Adam.
this is where they were making their mistakes, is in the initial.
Yes, and how I did this was I actually looked right where they started to have breakdown. And I grouped all the kids together that had breakdown in the same place. So like we see here, Christian.
Yeah, which is interesting. That's why there's so much information you can get, because Christian was my 7th, and like the 7th top speller. And he did well all the way over, but he had a breakdown right in the initial consonants,
Right.
where he missed 2 of them out of the 7.
And looking at his benchmarks, you wouldn't think that that would be something that he would need to work on. So it's nice to kind of have this data to kind of put it together. So all of these boys, Christian, Adam, and Ben, all had breakdowns in their initial consonants. So that might be something they want to begin practicing until they're ready to move on to the next one. Ryan, Audrey, Jason, and Jack all seem to break down around the final consonant sound, so that could be something that you're practicing with them. Adelaide, Aaliyah, Caitlin, Robert, and Jonathan all had struggles with their short vowel patterns, so that would be something that you could work on with them. And then digraphs, your highest group was Abigail, Joshua, Jake, and Riley. And so that's something that you can work with with them as well. And it was nice because, again, these kind of fell into manageable small groups. You don't have one group of 7 or 8 that really wouldn't work as a small group. You'd have to divide. So do you have any questions for me in your groupings?
I don't know. This is really great. I mean, it kind of validates some of what I know I've done grouping so far. But I think with my spelling, I had a lot of that, like, kind of group them into the level that they're in. Mm-hmm. And then kind of had gone to the books where kind of that level sort of starts. Mm-hmm. And I haven't been as careful to look at where the breakdown was here and to really start the sorts and the spelling words where the breakdown was, like with initial and final consonants, and then moving into short vowels and kind of using the sequence of that instead and finding that in the book. So that's something that I haven't done before that I'd really like to. I like how that's broken down.
And that might be something that's beneficial to try and then see how the kids move, and then they can always be adjusted because they are flexible.
Right.
And then when you do your second set of assessments, later in the year, what we can do is we can graph them sort of on the bar graphs. We can graph them next to these bars, and we'll have a double bar graph.
Yeah,
and
that sounds great. I can't wait to see.
Have a visual of the progress that they've made. And then we can actually look at your groups again and then reassess of where students need to be adjusted or moved, if any changes need to be made.
Yeah, I know last year I was surprised when I got to the middle of the year how much things had changed, especially in, like, the middle.
Right.
It seems like, I don't know, there's always some movement there where kids are kind of moving back a little bit. They weren't moving. I don't know, it just kind of validates why we're doing such developmental reading assessments and spelling assessments, that it is developmental. And some kids, even when placed in a group, they're moving faster or they're kind of moving a little bit slower than the rest, and to kind of mix them, to reassess them and then group them again.
And it's nice to kind of have this data on record because it's always something that you can refer back to. It'll be something that you'll be able to use in the future as well.
Yeah, that's great.
Thank you.
Thank you, Kelly.